Welcome back to On the Stand with Ashish Arun. Today we have an incredible guest whose career spans more than 3 decades of shaping and managing the spaces where we live, work and play. He's not just a powerhouse in property management, but also a leading voice when it comes to navigating the legal complexities of real estate as an expert witness. Our guest today is the award-winning K David Meit, Principal at Oculus Realty and Oculus Development and Advisory Services. David has an unmatched expertise in managing everything from multifamily and mixed-use properties to luxury developments and rent-regulated housing. If there's anyone who can turn a property into a community and ensure it's done right, it's him. David has also stepped into the courtroom as a trusted expert witness, guiding legal teams through the intricacies of property management standards of care. He's been at the helm of multiple industry associations, a mentor to future real estate professionals, and a man who truly knows the art of balancing legal insight with hands-on experience. We are thrilled to have David here with us today to talk about his journey, his role as an expert witness, and the hard-learned lessons that have made him a force in the real estate world. Let's dive right in and call on the stand K David Meit. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashish. It's really great being here today.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. So let's start from the beginning. You have more than 30 years of experience, almost 35 plus years of experience as a expert witness and real estate manager. So let's go before that. And how did you discover this path to becoming a real estate manager and then eventually an expert witness?
Sure, absolutely. I wish there was something surprising about it, but I basically graduated from school and went to work for my family's real estate company. And that was in 1990, which was a really interesting time because the real estate market had one of its low cycles coming out of the '86 Tax Act. And I learned how to manage pretty rough property in New York City neighborhoods. And that's how I got into the business. And it should be noted that my undergraduate degree is actually in art history because I've always had a love for collecting and the visual arts, which I still support. But I thought that real estate would be a better living.
Oh, though I must say that the art market seems to have really taken off, but
it's also very cyclical, just like real estate.
So, and do you think that art degree eventually must have helped you in managing your real estate by giving you that eye for art? Do you think it still helps having that degree somehow, even though you're not using it?
100%. My concentration was in architecture. And so the built environment has always fascinated me. And so it was kind of a natural way for me to combine both interests. And
Right.
as we may talk about a little later, is I love doing historical redevelopment of old properties. So it's absolutely informed me. And frankly, it's informed my expert witness practice because it taught me how to write as well.
That's great. So over 35 years of experience, what do you think has been the most rewarding part of managing different property types? I can think of the community aspect, but I'll let you, pick your answer and then explain.
Well, you're not far off on the community aspect of it. I chose to be a multifamily or residential property management company as opposed to commercial because I like the aspect of providing people their homes. We tend to touch people in a much more profound way than you do when you just come to the office for 8 hours a day, or in today's world, not at all. And we can actually talk about the challenges that had created during the pandemic as well. But it's being able to work with my residents, who we call our customers. There's a lot of the hospitality aspect of what I do that is relatively new to our business. It's about as long as I've been in the business, about 30 years, that this has become an important part. So I love customer service. I love hospitality. I love seeing a smile on people's face when they come home. And that's the most important thing that we do.
So how did the transition to expert witness work happen? I'm pretty sure you were super busy with all the different properties you were managing. You're also running your own company. So with the business and the day-to-day management, how did you decide that, okay, like, let's also look into becoming an expert witness?
By accident, as a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things in my career. I'm a big believer that when opportunity knocks, you just have to open the door, but you have to be prepared to open the door. And I was prepared. I started my firm, Oculus Realty, about 15 years ago. And about 2 years into it, I had a client that I was managing small boutique properties for who had purchased a loan for a building with the idea that he was going to foreclose and take over the property. And in DC, that's a way to get around rent control and a few other rules. And in order for him to litigate properly, he had to show that the current owner manager was doing a poor job. And so that was my first introduction to being an expert witness, was in this case. And it happened to be because we're in DC in federal court. So learning, Rule 26 and a few other things was all very, very brand new to me. And that was about 12 years ago.
Wow.
So I literally fell into it.
And I'm seeing that you also have you're a certified property manager. So you have that accreditation. So did you did you already have that at that point of time, or you decide to get it later?
Oh no, my accreditations and certifications have been a boost to my career. I actually became a CPM in early 2000. I became an ARM in the 1990s. So I've had that for the majority of my career.
And do you think the accreditation helped towards starting and growing your expert witness services?
100%. It's no different than, say, you're an engineer and being called in on construction defect issues. And, an expert would most likely be a PE, a public engineer, that's certified, or a CPA has a certification, or a doctor is a medical doctor, is an MD. There's no difference between those accreditation designations and licenses than my CPM and my real estate licenses.
So let's double click on the work that you do as an expert witness. And my basic understanding is that you would offer opinions on the standard of care on property management. But can you elaborate on, like what kind of issues you touch upon as an expert, and what kind of experience and training you rely on to offer these opinions?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we manage the built environment, which obviously is everywhere. And as you said in the introduction, it's where we work, we play, and we live. And so it really affects absolutely everybody. But things don't happen by accident. When you walk into a building and the door opens, the elevator comes, and you go to the bathroom and the toilet flushes, these very mundane things that you take for granted actually come from a series of standard operating procedures and trained professionals who ensure that these things work on a day-to-day basis. And so my expert witness work comes from my experience in understanding how that all works. And a lot of that has been trial and error from experience. I have my favorite saying is an expert is somebody who's made all the mistakes. And I've certainly made a lot of mistakes, but it also comes from a lot of training. And I'm a big believer of OJT, on the job training, but I'm also a believer in the academic aspect of it. In fact, I came to my CPM designation about 6 years after I started in the business. And it was a wonderful way to say, okay, I understood the street sense, or the street smarts aspect of administration and communication that's required to manage a property, but then understood kind of the science behind it, if you will. And that's where my involvement in our trade associations became really important. And so the Institute of Real Estate Management, which is an affiliate of the National Association of Realtors, is an international trade guild, if you will. And they offer what we consider the gold standard in accreditations, the CPM, the Certified Property Manager. And it took me several years to earn it. It is very much like a master's degree in real estate management. There's a lot of classes. There's a practicum that needs to be done. There's reports that need to be written. And then there's a final exam that needs to be taken. So it's a very high standard to be able to earn that. Through IRM, I also hold an accredited residential manager designation. That is not as difficult to earn, and they do have a similar designation for commercial property managers as well, called an ACOM. But it's the CPM that really is the gold standard. But the National Apartment Association offers designations, and the Building Owners and Managers Institute also offers the RPA, the Real Property Administrator designation, which I've chosen not to earn, but also become very important if you want to be an expert or subject matter expert in what it is that you do. I think that answers the question.
Oh, it really does. And that leads me to my next question, because based on that understanding, now I want to know what kind of legal disputes do you usually then opine on? Like, I'm again guessing it would be some premises liability, but I mean, what other kinds of disputes would we see?
So that's what most people think of. And I do plenty of plaintiff work, and that's usually what it's always about is premises liability. But there's a lot more. But to go into premises liability, that can be anywhere from your classic slip and fall to environmental hazards, where I might be working for a retaining attorney representing a child who's been poisoned by lead paint because a owner-operator didn't manage the process very well. Or mold, which is proven not to be a carcinogen, but can cause health effects and also needs to be managed correctly. And then there are fires that happen. But fires can run into different gamuts. It can be injury, but it could also be, say, a subrogation case. And I do a fair amount of insurance subrogation. So a subrogation case might be, okay, there was a fire, but whose fault was the fire? Was it a tenant not being able to manage their life safety systems, or was it the landlord or the property manager who did not follow up on, say, inspection reports that something wasn't working when it was supposed to be working? So all of those kind of things are pretty obvious because they have to deal with usually a disaster of some sort or an injury that took place on a property. But it also is much more than that. I deal with a lot of partnership disputes where you might have two partners and one, say, is the operating partner and one is the investment partner. And for whatever reason, they might feel that the operating partner isn't driving or creating as much value as they should. So I get brought in to say, all right, are they providing the best practices? Are they providing the standard of care? Are the rents being increased? Are in retail, are leases being administrated properly? You know, in residential, are people being evicted but they don't pay the rent on time? And so I review a lot of that information to see if there's been a loss of value because of somebody's action or inaction. I even had a case where an unfortunate investor was hit by a truck and killed. And because he was his own owner-operator, I was asked by my retaining attorney to come up with the value of the work he did on an annualized basis managing his property. So he could then take it to an actuary and create a value of his life, which was kind of really interesting case. And it kind of goes on from there. You know, there could be issues of, I talked about environmental hazards, which is a big one. I have a case right now where a historic mill in Massachusetts was renovated, but not done correctly. And so moisture was allowed to seep into the building, and what is an old building, which has created mold that has made all the residents have to vacate the property. And so the opinion is not just me, but it's also construction people and everybody else. But from my perspective, as a standard of care in property management, how was it managed? You know, how was the residents informed? How did the property management deal with it once it was learned? You know, those kind of things. And so I'm brought in to opine on all different types of aspects of that. So the pandemic has been really interesting, and I collected a lot of data on how the rules are being made up as we go. And what's happening now several years afterwards, some of these lawsuits are coming about. And so the question is not so much on the cleanliness issue, because the CDC has been pretty specific that the rules were the rules, and if you followed those, you were okay. And they've limited a lot of litigation from that perspective. But what I am coming up is seeing regarding the rent eviction moratorium and the rules and regulations that were involved from state to state. And did a property management company collect the rent that they were supposed to, and could they? And so I've been brought in on a couple cases on that, depending on the state's rules and regulations and how that was managed. So it really is, it has to do with real property. I get involved in it.
Seems like a wide variety of cases touching upon a wide, like a very large spectrum of people, right from people who are like partners and business owners to poor people who are, getting evicted for the rent moratorium. So you have, like a very varied practice. But one case which we were talking about earlier, I really wanted to talk about that, is the dog attack case where you had an emotional support animal versus a service animal.
Yes.
So what I really wanted to know was what was your role in case like that, and if you can shed some light on this case.
I've actually had a few cases that
Mm-hmm.
are somewhat related. And let me back up and say that my firm is very pet inclusive. So we have a really good understanding of pets on the property. And it's, we use it for marketing because pet owners are absolutely wonderful. But there is an issue within property management today, multifamily property management, between ESAs, emotional support animals, and service animals. And of course, if you read the newspaper, you've heard about, the ostrich that somebody wanted to bring on an airplane, or, the goldfish, or you hear these stories about emotional support animals. And what's happened is that the industry has become rife with people who offer fake ESA certifications. And I've had a number of cases where either the property manager has been duped or a litigation has revolved around somebody arguing that they have an ESA where in fact we've proven that it's not an ESA because it was falsified. Or they've just brought in an animal that shouldn't be there. And what it comes down to is liability, right? So as an owner operator, you want to make sure that all the residents on your property are protected, right? And you do your best to do that. And the ESA is one thing to say, okay, you have this dog or any other kind of animal, but that doesn't obviate the need that the dog needs to have, rabies shots and needs to be well trained, and it needs to be cleaned up after itself and things like that. And so there's been a number of issues on properties where the dog has not been trained. And this one case particularly that you mentioned is a guest that was actually visiting a friend who was living at the property and was attacked by a dog that was not on a leash. And this was a dog that was identified as a problem, and it was not rectified. And it was discovered that the ESA that this person provided was not even real, and a simple phone call would have proved that. And so here, again, I'm working for the plaintiff's attorney. It was very easy for me to show that the property manager didn't quite do what they were supposed to pursuant to the standard of care. And so these are really interesting cases. And of course, you can go the other way where you have something happen where, somebody is unhappy because they're not allowed to keep their dog, but the property manager is showing that they're meeting the current code and the current requirements of their lease and local jurisdiction to show that the dog shouldn't be on the property. And then sometimes that gets litigated, and I have to opine on that as well.
Mm-hmm. So earlier you told me that when you got your first case, you started learning about the Daubert and Rule 26 and federal Rule 702. So how important have you found that for an expert, how important is it to actually understand the laws? You're obviously an expert in the field that you are, but experts are not supposed to be experts in the law. So where do you place the importance on understanding the law that governs expert witness testimony?
I think it's extremely important. I've chosen to grow this practice and become a professional in the expert witness business, no different than my being a property manager. I take it very seriously, being a lifelong learner and understanding the rules and regulations of what it is that I do. So is it important that I know as much as a lawyer? No. But it's just like what I tell my team in property management. You need to know enough to be dangerous, right? I don't need to know how to fix an HVAC system, but I need to know enough to be able to ask the questions to make sure that I'm doing things correctly. So it's the same thing with the law. To understand how a report is supposed to be drafted and presented, to understand what a docket is, and understand timeframes, and understand what discovery is and interrogatories, because these are all source materials from my reports. So if I didn't understand all of this, then I wouldn't be a very effective expert witness. So I read a lot. I am a member of the American Bar Association as an associate member, and I'm a member of the Property and Trust section of the ABA, which informs me all the time about what's going on, particularly on the property aspect of litigation. And I've been trained. And there's lots of different organizations out there that provide training for expert witnesses. No matter what it is that your expertise is, they'll teach you how to write the report, how to defend yourself in testimony, how to do all the things that are required. And again, I'm not a lawyer and I don't pretend to be a lawyer, but the lawyers appreciate that I do speak their language.
Yeah. And what has your experience been with attorneys? Like, are they usually willing to help experts understand the law and understand the framework? Or is there an expectation that as an expert, you should already know that?
Great question. I have found that all over the board. There are good attorneys and there's not so good attorneys. And I've worked with, dozens and dozens of attorneys at this point. And I find that most of them appreciate that I bring some sort of knowledge to the table. And depending on the situation, sometimes I bring more knowledge on a legal case to the table than they even do, because I'm the property management expert witness, where they're just a premises liability or injury expert, but they don't really understand my business. And so there are certain key cases that involve around certain aspects of what we do, like the liability that comes from knowing that you have a security or controlled access issue that then ultimately leads to somebody being injured. And then what does that look like? And I mention that case, and sometimes the lawyers don't even know that case. That set a lot of the ground rules for how that is litigated. So they tend to appreciate that. I've also had lawyers who, want to be the lawyer and want to kind of tell me what it is that I know. And I tend to not work well with those kind of lawyers. And I wouldn't do business with them again.
That brings me to the next skill that I feel like experts need, and that's interpersonal skills. Because you have to be an expert, but you also need to be able to teach the jury. You have to be great at the deposition. So do you have anything you would want to share about the importance of interpersonal skills, and what can experts do to improve these skills? And where do you
100%.
see them going? Yeah, where do you see them missing the boat on that?
Yeah, so sadly, a skill set that I find missing in business in general, actually probably in all society, is the ability to communicate effectively, particularly in the written word. And that's where I alluded to earlier my degree in art history, which is all writing and very florid writing and whatnot. If you've ever read an art history report or just been to a museum and read a wall description. So I was very fortunate to have a great high school teacher, as well as in college when I studied art history, to teach me how to string together thoughts, make a hypothesis, and defend the thesis, right? And that is all that my expert witness reports are. In fact, I tell people all the time, if you were good at writing a research or a term paper, you're going to be good at writing a expert witness report, because it's really the same exact skill set. Now, the difference is as you said, it's the testimony aspect of it. Unless you're a doctorate and you wrote a thesis that you have to defend orally, you don't really get much of an opportunity to defend things orally like you have to do when you're dealing with testimony. So being able to speak effectively is obviously very important. I do think that and written communications goes hand in hand, but there's nothing wrong with becoming a student of oration. Good trial lawyers know it's theater, right? And I've been taught that, not only from watching Perry Mason, but also in the formal training that I've had in understanding how to deal with testimony and how to tell the story. One of my favorite quotes from one of my teachers who trained me in expert witness is, remember, when you're on the stand, you're trying to inform 12 individuals who weren't smart enough to get out of jury duty. And so even though that sounds somewhat oblique, the reality is that making sure that you're explaining your expertise in layman's terms. And so your attorney can use your testimony and your report as, to use this metaphor, as an arrow in their quiver. They're trying to hit a target to make a point to win their case. I'm just an arrow in their quiver. And if I can help them hit that point, then I'm doing my job effectively. But it's understanding how to do that effectively becomes really important. So I don't underestimate the amount of time it takes to be trained on that.
And litigation is also very unpredictable in the way that attorneys would come to you and they'd try and get an initial assessment, and then trial can get pushed or depositions can get delayed. So there's a lot of radio silence in
Welcome to my
between.
life.
And then, yeah. So how do you deal with that? Like, like any best practices, anything you do to, like manage your, because if somebody comes and asks you about a case that, the last time you referred to it and studied it was like 6 months ago, and now you have to quickly move on and quickly remember the facts, what your assessment was. So how do you manage that?
Well, I hate to be on the nose about it, but I do get paid to
Mm-hmm.
do that. And so it really doesn't bother me. I just
Mm-hmm.
sat in a trial for 2.5 days because it was a very complicated case, and my retaining attorney thought it was important for me to hear testimony to help me further understanding what the issues were so I could opine on them. In the end of the day, and I queried her, I said, do you really want me sitting here for 7 hours for 2.5 days? And in the end, it was actually extremely helpful because the second night I was there, I was able to put together a whole huge presentation tabulated with all my kind of responses and things I wanted that attorney to elicit from the witnesses, only to have the entire case dismissed as a mistrial because of some jury issues. And so we're retrying it in April. All right, would I like that case to be done and moved on? Sure, because I got a lot of other cases. On the other hand, I have a whole nother 3 days worth of trial that I'm going to get paid for. So I hate to come at it from that grubby kind of way, but the reality is that I do get paid to be at the beck and call of my retaining attorneys. And yes, I do forget. I have dozens and dozens of cases, but I do have a great paralegal who reminds me and keeps a great spreadsheet, as well as the software that I use. It gives me up to date on what the case is, who the attorney is, am I working for the plaintiff, am I working for the defendant, things like that.
And would you recommend that experts like follow up with attorneys if they haven't heard from them in like maybe weeks or months, or they should just let the attorney be and wait for them to reach out to them when they need them?
I think it's good business practice to reach out. I mean, they're a client. So I treat my retaining attorneys no different than I treat any of my advisory or property management clients. Communication is key. Attorneys aren't always the greatest communicators, as you probably well know. And so I was doing that myself for a long time, but as my practice grew, I hired a paralegal. And so she keeps me very well informed, and she knows that if I filed a report, it can literally take 3 months, 6 months before a trial may happen. Or during that period of time, and this is my favorite thing to happen, is I file a report and then it goes to mediation and the case gets settled. There have been times when we don't get informed that the case is settled. So I ask Freda, who's my paralegal, to obviously follow up every 3 months and see where the status is. In fact, I just cleaned out a whole bunch of cases because sure enough, nobody told us that the cases had been settled. And so we move forward. So I think communicating and knowing what's going on is extremely important.
Yeah, I
And
think 3 months.
even after a report has been filed, obviously my reports always have that language in there that, I have the option to update the report if new information comes available. So I may come across some more research or a new code that say I'm working on another case, and this just happened to me, that I just fits perfectly on the case in a report that I've already written, and I'll call the attorney and say, okay, this works really well. What do you want me to do with it? You want me to update it? Do you want to wait until trial or deposition? Things like that. So I think the attorneys that I work with the best appreciate the fact that we're a partnership and that I'm there to make them look good. They're my client, and it's in everybody's best interest to ensure that we're on the same page.
So I think that's great advice, and I love the fact that you have that 3-month framework. I think it's a very sweet spot. The attorney doesn't feel pestered, because last year we spoke to a plaintiff's attorney, and that's what he said, that the best experts, they don't keep pestering you, but they do check in once in a while. So I think you have the best practices there, and I think most experts, if not all, should implement that. Let's segue a little into the pitfalls in property management that like lead to all these disputes that you opine on and you provide your expertise on. So can you talk about some common pitfalls that property managers could avoid, like some issues where you see that you keep seeing them time and again, and you're like, oh, like this is something that is to so much litigation, but it doesn't really need to happen?
all the time. And it's funny because one of the things I've learned about the legal practice is that very often briefs are copied over and over again and just changed with the facts, because there are only so many things under the law that has to take place. Well, I've discovered that in my 12 years as being an expert witness. And so I have somewhat ready to go opinions based on certain situations that then just get supported by the facts of the case or the current codes that I'm referring to. And the two areas that those really fall into is training and standard operating procedures. And those are really the two that I find the most. Is what happens in property management, and this is important for any retaining attorney who has litigation in property management, is to understand that most states and jurisdictions do not require a license or any accreditation. And really anybody can hang out a shingle and say, I'm a property manager. Well, boy, does that run into a lot of trouble. And when you read in the paper or you hear on the news these terrible events of, the family dies because of carbon monoxide poisoning overnight, or, a fire took place, or, there was a murder, or a rape, in a building, it's usually because the property management team were not professional or they were not trained. And so I deal with a lot of mom and pop operators, but just because you're a mom and pop doesn't mean that you are not required to meet the standard of care, right? Yeah. And so I opine on that a lot. And one of the first things I always ask my retaining attorneys is, if I'm dealing on a plaintiff situation, is what is your standard operating procedures? Is it in writing? And what is the training that you do? So what's interesting about an SOP is they're readily available. And I'm always surprised when a company goes into business of managing property and doesn't write down what their policies and procedures are. It's such a complicated business. It revolves, as the litigation shows, it revolves around legal aspects of lease administration. It revolves around controlled access, which we'll talk about, on people who are invited onto a property, who's a tenant versus a guest, versus an employee. It revolves around fair housing, which is a whole nother issue on the residential side. It has to do with construction, maintenance, and repairs, and how well somebody is managing the property, life safety systems, risk management, all of these kind of things go into it, and finance as well. I haven't even talked about, I regularly have cases where a client may be suing a management company because they feel that the numbers aren't correct, or something nefarious has been going on. And I've been hired on both sides to either show that no, nothing has been nefarious, or in fact, there has been something. Or I've been hired by plaintiffs and I've showed that, there really is no case here. And that's another interesting aspect. Doesn't happen often, but I've been hired by attorneys where once I get into the case, I say, you don't really want me to write a report. I'm not going to be that arrow for you, because the reality is either something was done correctly or something was not done correctly, and so I can show that. And then once an SOP is written, it's great, but if it's sitting on the shelf gathering dust, then it's not help to anybody. So it's all about training. And that's where the trade associations and earning the accreditation becomes really important. And it's like, doctors understand what goes into surgery and what needs to get done. I had a minor procedure done last week, and it was so minor, but the amount of times I was asked about where it was and how it was going to be done and everything else struck me, because it's the Checklist Manifesto, which is one of my favorite books. I don't know if you've ever read that. And property management is no different. Doctors and pilots go through a checklist, and property managers should also go through a checklist. And by the way, that's the other thing I ask for all the time is inspections. Was the property inspected? So training, inspections, SOP, those become the three things that come up quite often in pretty much all of my cases, particularly dealing with premises liability issues, either for defendant or a plaintiff. One of the issues that I do see a lot is this concept of controlled access versus safety and security. A lot of plaintiffs' attorneys want to find fault with safety and security on a property, that the property manager or owner operator didn't provide safety or security. Well, I don't know any property manager or housing provider that in writing provides safety and security on a property. Safety and security is a personal responsibility, always has been. But what a property, being the built environment, can provide is what we call controlled access. So there could be a gate to a garden-style community. There could be a fob system to get into a building. It could be there could be cameras that are just there to see what's going on in the property. But all of these things become an issue when something happens on a property. And I've opined, again, for both defendants and for plaintiffs. And on the defendant side, if you've got an SOP, if you've got a good inspections, you show that things are being recorded and monitored, and you've done everything that you were supposed to do from a controlled aspect situation, there's no liability. The attorney can't make that nexus between liability and causality, right? And so I get brought in to provide that opinion on what that means. Now, on the plaintiff side, and I'm working for the plaintiff's attorney, I can also very easily show where none of that has been done. Right. Maybe they hired the management company hired a rent-a-cop, but they didn't do their job. They didn't walk around and check off that they were here, there, and everywhere else. And more importantly, the management or who was responsible didn't go back and actually check to see that things were inspected. I have a case right now that was a life safety case. This really isn't related to controlled access to security, but it is life safety, where in fact they went through the exercise to bring in an inspector to make sure that the fire alarm systems were working, came back with a report saying that this, that, and the other needed to be repaired. And the property management company just took the report, because they get it every quarter or every 6 months, and filed it away. Didn't do anything about it. And sure enough, there was a fire and somebody's been injured. And so I get called in to opine upon what is best practices, what's the standard of care to make sure that you're following up. Are you inspecting? Is it part of your SOP? And have your people been trained effectively? So those are kind of the three things in property management that I find a lot of issues that I have to opine on.
So clearly, if more property managers were not just paying lip service to the standard operating procedures and they were actually implementing it, like what I'm hearing is that if more people applied more common sense, things would be a lot better for everyone.
Well, property management is common sense. I like to say, and my colleagues, it's not rocket science. It really isn't. And, I was asked a long time ago in an interview I had decades ago, the two most important things in property management. And I said administration and communication, right? You want to communicate effectively with your customer and frankly, all your stakeholders, because your stakeholders are not just your tenants or your residents. They're the building inspector. It's the government agency that oversees. It's your partners. It's, it's the mortgage or the mortgagee of your property, the bank, whatever it might be. These are all the people that you touch in property management. And so you really have to have a very good understanding of all the parties that you touch to be able to move forward. And in the litigation, it's usually a failing in one of those situations that you've come up with.
Okay, David, this has been really helpful. Let me now ask you questions on behalf of a property manager who has not been an expert witness yet, but has heard about this whole consultancy aspect of litigation. What would your first advice to somebody like that be? How can they get started?
Well, I think you need to have decades of experience to begin with.
Okay.
One thing about property management is that, yes, you can earn your designation, although you do need a certain amount of time to even earn the designation, but you really need what I called OJT, on-the-job training. It is such a varied business to live through certain experiences, to understand certain situations, to make the mistakes that make you an expert become very, very important. So I was asked not too long ago, why I didn't become an expert earlier. Because I was a newbie, because I was new in the business. When I had a client feel that I had enough expertise to help them win a case, That's when I realized that I had a level of expertise that was marketable, right? And when I realized that this existed, and by the way, and this goes to the heart of the question, I learned that this truly existed because of a colleague that is in Hiram with me, who has been an expert witness for about 25 years. She's not even a practicing property manager anymore. She just was for a long time, got into the business, and for the last 25 years of her career, she's just been doing this. Right now, those who are in the business as expert in property management are graying quickly. I'm actually one of the more younger guys in his 50s that are doing this right now. And I would say to somebody who's interested, and I've said this to a number of colleagues, build up your resume, build up your expertise, build up your designations, because that does become important to your CV, right? That's your prima facie as an expert, right? That you've not just been in business for 30 years, but you have third-party acknowledgement of your expertise. You've won awards, or you have the designations or the accreditations, your license, all those things. Well, it took me 30 years to earn all of those things. But there's no reason that somebody who is not in their 40s, have been in the business for 20 years, to start thinking about this, putting together a resume, and just get started. I took my courses through a company called Seek, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. But your own firm, Juris Pro, IMS, there's just so many different expert witness resources that are out there. I read all the newsletters, I opine, I'm on LinkedIn, I talk to plenty of my colleagues that are expert witnesses, be it doctors or engineers, allied or not allied, because we all share the same requirements to be able to opine effectively in our area of expertise.
But even then, I'm sure you must have your own challenges as an expert witness, because again, you are the CEO of a company, so you have to manage the business. You also are a property manager, so you also have to look after the implementation, and you're an expert witness. So what are your challenges as a thorough professional who's juggling multiple things?
Yeah, well, you forgot to mention I'm also primary broker for a lot of different management companies. So I also work on that. Okay. So yeah, it keeps me extremely busy, but it also provides several streams of revenue. I've done that on purpose, particularly as I've changed. I've actually pulled back in the last 5 years from hardcore property management. Been there, done that. I had done that for a long time, managed thousands and thousands of units. Now I only manage a few properties that I have an equity stake in, and so I manage them for my partners. And I like that. So I'm not as involved in property management as I used to, but it does keep me still very busy on the properties that we do have. I've been told that as an expert, I could stop managing property, but I loathe to do so, because I've also heard stories of doctors who become experts after they retire, but their lifetime ends up going away after a couple of years because technology changes so fast. Yeah. The medical practice changes so fast. So I'm very active in my industry. I have leadership roles in the Institute of Real Estate Management on the national level. I chair different ethics committees and finance committees, and I speak a lot in the industry. I write a lot in the industry. And so that all informs how I manage property, and the experiences that I have managing property informs my expert witness work. And by the way, my expert witness work also informs my property management, because I've had situations where a situation will arise and I can see how that occurred, and I'll talk to my team and say, are we doing this correctly ourselves? Because I want to stay out of litigation ourselves.
Definitely.
So I don't see myself stopping managing in the near future. But the other challenge though is the amount of work that I'm getting, and it's a lovely problem to have. I get phone calls every week from retaining attorneys looking for my expertise. The good news is that I keep on increasing my rates, and I haven't seemed to find the ceiling on that yet, which is marvelous. But the other thing is I'm also very choosy on the cases that I take. If I find an attorney is a very new attorney and this is all very new to them, I'll tend to recommend maybe somebody else, because I have found those become a time sink. That's another recommendation to my fellow experts, depending how seasoned they are. If you have a non-seasoned attorney, they end up being a time suck. and things don't go as well because they're not getting you the documents that you need to properly opine and things like that. And then the other issue that I'm facing right now is because of how quickly we've grown is, do I want to create a practice or do I still want to be a single practitioner? And frankly, I get different answers from different people that I speak to. And so to the audience, I think that's a decision that somebody has to make. I have right now 2 highly qualified CPMs and 1 real estate developer that is working with me on some of the cases that I give them kind of like an associate attorney. They do some of the research and can help with it, but they're still my opinions. The question is, do I want to bring them on as full partners as, okay, you now have this specific issue. I'm not an office manager, but this is a fellow CPM who has spent her career as an office manager. And I can then bring you under the Oculus expert witness umbrella. The problem is then do I want to manage people again? And one of the reasons why I pulled back from property management is I used to have 60 people working for me, and that was a lot of work just managing people. And so that's one of the things I love about the expert witness work is, yes, I have some support people that help me with the administrative aspect, but it's all me. I'm the one doing the research, I'm the one doing the writing and things like that. And I'm the one that has the relationship with the retaining attorney. And I really enjoy that because in the end of the day, yes, I can delegate authority, but I can't delegate responsibility. Yeah. And sometimes delegating authority means that I have to take responsibility for them. And I've learned in some cases that that's not always fun.
Yeah. So David, before I let you go, one last question. It's on the responsiveness to, like, now you have a paralegal who's helping you handle cases, but I'm sure that happened after you got really busy and you decided, okay, I need to bring in some help. But one big complaint that attorneys have towards experts is that experts, and it goes both ways actually, that it's about, again, responsiveness, that attorneys would call experts and they would be unable, like nobody would answer the call or they would not return their calls for days. And at times they would end up retaining the first expert who answers or who returns their call.
Yes.
So do you think, like, how big of a role has being responsive, being available, how important has that been in your career that has gotten you to a point where now you're wondering, okay, how many more people can I bring in to help me with my practice?
So, it's not an expert witness issue. It's a business issue, I find. It's reputational. The only thing you die with is your reputation. And I was taught a long time ago that you show up on time, if not a little early, and you pick up the phone or you return the email or whatever it might be. And I'm amazed how often I hear from my retaining attorneys about, geez, thank you for calling me back. Earlier I got a phone call back. This was a guy who called me yesterday. I returned his call immediately, and now he's calling me back. And yes, I do find that I often get cases because I'm the only guy who called back. I like to think it would more merit than just calling back. But I've also found out showing up is 99% of success, right? And I'm amazed at something that I've taught my daughter. It's amazing what people will react to you just showing up and being smarter than the average bear. So I think it's a huge aspect of what we do. And the responsiveness is not only on that initial phone call, but I've never missed a deadline. And I've always followed up on new information. And it goes back to communicating regularly with the retaining attorney that we talked about. Being out there. Initiative is one of my company's guiding principles. And I'm a huge believer in initiative. Take the initiative. Workmanship is another one of my guiding principles. Show your work product and take the initiative, and you'll be amazed at how much business will beget business.
That's actually excellent advice that would not apply to, again, like you said, it's not an expert witness issue, it's a business issue. And I think it's a very personal issue. Like, even if you're an employee, you're not a business owner, showing up, being on time, getting back to people on time, just the basics will put you ahead of 90% of the people.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, David, for your time and your insights today. I have personally learned a lot, even though I'm not looking to get into property management and expert witness work.
Good for you.
But I don't know about that. But trust me, I really think that any attorney who listens to this, who who practices in the domain, or experts, property managers, or experts from other domains, they'll all find this to be really useful. What's the best way to reach you and find you?
Email kdmeit@oculusrealty.com. You can also find my CV at oculusexpertwitness.net or on my Seek profile.
All right. Thank you so much, David. This was everything I had hoped for, and you were great. Thank you so much for your time.
Great, Ashish. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.
If you found this podcast useful, remember to subscribe and give us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. This will help other users find this podcast and benefit from the insights shared by our guests. If you'd like to be featured as a guest on this show, please write to media@xlightum.com. See you in the next episode.